started recording before we actually start the time. Okay, here's the great pleasure to introduce John LeDuc, who is the speaker this evening. I came to Acadia in 1989, and when I arrived, Tom Herman, whom you know, some of you know, and two people from Parks, Cliff Drysdale and Neil Monroe, and a person called Pollock, I think his name was, had started something called Science and Management of Protected Areas Association. We started to organize the very first conference of Science and Management of Protected Areas. And that's when I first met John LeDuc, who's the speaker tonight, because he gave a paper at that conference, and the conference was in 1991, I believe. And then the next one was in 1994, and it was held in Halifax. And John gave a talk there as well about protected areas and the process. And basically that's what we're going to hear about tonight. And I think it's quite relevant, given that there's the act, I forget the name of it. Anyway, the government has legislated that 20% of the province is going to be protected by 2030. So they're going through a process again to designate protected areas. And this is where the Chain Lakes protected areas comes in that we have started. But tonight we'll hear from, and John, you were the director of protected areas branch, and so he knows all the ins and outs and maybe why sometimes it goes a little slow. Anyways, so please welcome John LeDuc.
Does that work? Yes, it does. Super. Okay. Glasses. Video. Yeah, so here we go. So hello everyone, and thank you for inviting me to meet with you to speak about Nova Scotia's protected areas. And I'd like to congratulate you on your work to date on the Chain Lake area of Kings County. And I would also like to recognize the excellent ongoing work in the Goldsmith Lake area by the Citizen Science Group in Annapolis County. And you will see from my presentation that NGOs and the public have played and will continue to play a critical role in protected area land in Nova Scotia. And I'd like to congratulate you on your 50th years as a national society and all the good work you have done over that time. The presentation will look at the evolution of Nova Scotia protected area system, focused on protected area establishment and objectives as they change through time. And so protected areas refer to provincial wilderness areas, nature reserves, some provincial parks, national parks and national wildlife management areas, and lands protected by private land trusts. Okay, let's see if this, yes, it worked. I'd like to acknowledge that the land I will speak about today is the ancestral home and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Early land and wildlife conservation in Nova Scotia was motivated by public concerns over wildlife population declines and land use practices, such as forest harvesting, damming of rivers, uncontrolled human-caused forest fires, and poaching. These were common issues across North America, with many jurisdictions responding in part by creating reserves or sanctuaries to control human activities. The first bird sanctuaries were created at Le Bear, and larger sanctuaries were established in the late 1920s and into the 1930s, Tobeatic, Waverley, Liscombe, and Shenectady were important functions of the sanctuaries. Tobeatic Game Sanctuary was called Tobeatic Park, and the initial purpose of Waverley was to provide a safe wilderness for scout activities. The sanctuaries restricted hunting and established a management presence through games. However, they did not regulate land use, and over time, forest harvesting, road networks, and other land uses took place on both Crown and private lands within the sanctuaries. The exception being national wildlife management areas established on land and regulated by the federal government. The Breton Highlands National Park was established in the 1930s. Based on the standing scenery of the Cape Breton Highlands and natural landscapes seen as significant on the national level. The park was partially the result of a movement that began in 1914, led by prominent citizens and conservationists in the province, to establish a national park similar to the Western national parks. The areas evaluated and promoted by local champions included the Bredor Lakes, Cape Blomidon, the waterways of Yarmouth County, and northern Cape Breton, which was chosen. Federal funding was available to upgrade the Cabot Trail through the park, and a national park would develop camping, day use facilities, a golf course and lodge on the Ingonish side, and it would promote the province nationally and internationally. As with many national parks across Canada, expropriation was used to acquire some of the land. In this case, a number of landowners with were expropriated. The national park was the first park in the province that protected a large wilderness area. It included many rivers, lakes, wetlands, steep deciduous valleys and canyons, maritime boreal forests, the province's only taiga landscape, and the cliff-dominated rugged coastline. The post-war economic and baby boom created demands for travel-oriented parks and opportunities to appreciate scenery, engage in nature and outdoor activities. Federal funding contributed to highway construction and the development of provincial parks for public use and enjoyment. The first provincial park policy called for a picnic park every 40 miles and a provincial campground in every county. Most parks established at this time in association with main travelways were established through the acquisition of private lands and had a relatively small land base. Examples you may be familiar with include the islands near Shelburne, Gray's Island near Chester, Porter's Lake and Laurie Park near Halifax, Battery, Waikago, and Myra and Cape Breton. In the 1960s, the fate of beaches was becoming a major environmental issue in the province. The public was growing alarmed at the commercial removal of sand and gravel directly from beaches and the lack of public access to popular beaches that were largely in private ownership. This resulted in the first Beaches Act to restrict the removal of sand and gravel, and in provincial park policy direction to acquire beaches and to acquire adequate backup land for parking and park facilities. Kejimkujik was established in the late 1960s. The Annapolis Valley Board of Trade advanced the notion of creating a national park in the western end of the province in 1945. 3 areas were evaluated: Keji, Cape Blomidon, and Cape Blandford, with Keji being selected. Lands were assembled from existing Crown, land swaps with forest companies, and through expropriation of smaller acreages from local landowners and several Mi'kmaq families and reserves under protest. The park was established to represent the inland lakes and waterways and forests of interior Nova Scotia and captured habitats of uncommon and rare species. Early public consultations helped shape the park towards minimal development compared to some national parks with town sites, golf courses, and ski hills. The seaside adjunct at St. Catharines River was added to the park in 1985. The Canadian government recognized Kejimkuji's Mi'kmaq cultural landscape significance by designating it a National Historic Site in 1995. Over 80% of Keji users are from Nova Scotia, with 4th and 5th family generations of successive users common. The 60s and 70s was a time of major Crown land allocations and the development of new pulp and paper mills at Pictou and Port Hawkesbury. Most of the Crown land in the 6 eastern counties was allocated to Stora through a license agreement. A large portion of Crown lands in central part of the province were leased to Scott Paper, while major blocks of Crown land in the western end were used to fill forest volume agreements with sawmill owners and for the CanXL fiber plant at East River. Together with the Bowater Mill at Liverpool, the future direction was set for the type of forest management for the province. Shorter rotations, softwood preference, intensive management, clear cuts, and limitations on other land use options, including conservation. In the 1970s onwards, the provincial park system shifted to a more comprehensive system with larger parks and protection-oriented parks. In the 1970s, the Eastern Shore Seaside Park System grew out of the rejection of a national park for the Eastern Shore by citizens and forestry interests. The resulting provincial park system for the shore was guided by extensive participation of local citizen committees. In the early 1970s, land at Cape Blomidon was acquired and also donated by the Jodrey family of Hansport. More land was assembled throughout the province for beach parks. In the 1980s, larger areas were assessed and set aside for provincial parks in the near urban region of HRN, including McNabbs Island, Long Lake, Cole Harbor, Dollar Lake. Land acquisitions included unique features and uncommon ecosystems, like the huge complex dune systems of West Mabou and Pomfret beaches. In the 1990s, in response to local citizen groups and the municipality, lands at Cape Chenectad were acquired from Scott Paper. At 10,000 acres, the largest acquisitions for a provincial park in the province. The park was planned, developed, and initially managed through local community groups. In 1989, the Special Places Protection Act was passed to protect important archaeology and ecological sites in the province. The primary focus for ecological sites was the protection of IBP, International Biological Program sites. The IBP initiative was global in scope, with about 70 sites identified in Nova Scotia, mostly small but highly significant sites. Example, Sporting Lake Island. The act allowed for designation of private land with the authorization of the landowner. McFarland Woods, protecting old growth forests in Inverness County, was designated with authorization from the landowner, as was Pinook Lake old growth forests. The act created strict protections with sites designated as nature reserves. The Nova Scotia Museum originally administered the act, but in the late 1990s, it was transferred to Natural Resources and then to the Environment Department. In the 1990s, global attention was given to sustainable development and the continuing loss of wild natural spaces and biodiversity. The Brundtland Commission, or World Commission on Environment Development, and the UN Convention on Biodiversity suggested 12% as a target for protected areas. In Canada, the World Wildlife Fund created its Endangered Spaces campaign to protect wilderness and representative ecosystems of the country. Nova Scotia signed on to the campaign in 1992, as did other provinces. The World Wildlife Fund took an approach of working collaboratively with governments and industry to solve problems and address barriers to land conservation, recognizing conservation successes while criticizing conservation failures. Nova Scotia initiated planning work in 1991 for its first protected area system plan. At this time, there was only 2% protected in the province, and most of that was within national parks. In May 1991, the first SAMPA, Science and Management of Protected Areas Conference, was held at Acadia. Soren and Tom Herman were two of the lead organizers. The international conference drew attention to the full range of protected areas establishment and management issues from a science and research perspective. In 1994, after several years of internal planning and interdepartmental reviews, the Protected Area Plan was released for public consultation. The plan was science-informed, incorporating best practices of conservation planning, and focused on conservation priority of protecting the most ecological significant large remaining intact patches on Crown land. The plan proposed protecting 31 large areas and increasing the amount of land protected up to 8.1%, adding 700,000 acres to the system. In the fall of 1994, a public review committee initiated a public consultation process on the proposed plan. The committee held 26 meetings in communities across the province and received over 500 submissions with 2,000 people attending the meetings. Mi'kmaq consultation was mainly through the Nova Scotia Canada Mi'kmaq tripartite ongoing process. There was also several direct presentations to the review committee from the Mi'kmaq, including one which recommended the protection of Glooscap Mountain as a sacred site. Provincial and local community organizations with a wide range of interests actively participated in the process. The conservation interests were led by local groups such as the Tobeatic Wilderness Committee and provincial organizations like CPAWS, Federation of Nova Scotia Naturalists, World Wildlife Fund, and the EAC. The review committee recommended the protection of all 31 sites, plus several additional sites, including Glooscap Mountain and the acquisition of Cape Split. The committee recommended additional traditional sport fishing and hunting be permitted, and commercial forestry, mineral exploration, development, roads, transmission lines, dams, etc. be prohibited. They also recommended new protected area legislation be developed for the designation of the areas. Following release of the Public Review Committee report, the government announced acceptance of all recommendations in late 1995. Well, despite having a moratorium in place since 1991, and despite the government's full acceptance of the Public Review Committee recommendations, the province withdrew the Canada Protected Area known as Jim Campbell's Barren in Cape Breton in December 1996, based on extensive lobby by the mineral industry and local development associations. This resulted in a year-long land use conflict that divided communities, questioned the integrity of the process, and received national media attention. In October 1997, Jim Campbell Barren was returned to the list of protected areas, and as part of the same decision, the Protected Area Program was transferred from Natural Resources Department to the Environment Department. In December 1998, the Wilderness Areas Protection Act was passed in a minority government with all party support, but only after much intense negotiation and active lobbying from many interests. The Act formally protected all 31 areas, increasing the amount of land protected to 8.1%. The main purpose of the Act is to protect biodiversity and natural processes and to prohibit resource development. Additional purposes are to permit outdoor recreation, education, and scientific research. In the 1990s and into the present, private land conservation made major contributions to land protection and in increasing public awareness of the importance and urgency of land conservation. Together, the Nature Conservancy of Canada and the Nova Scotia Nature Trust have secured over 40,000 hectares of land based on sound conservation science. The organizations have become very skilled at applying a range of tools to meet landowner needs and in fundraising. They have also developed a committed volunteer base to steward and monitor their protected lands. Their work has been simply outstanding, with major land assemblies such as the 100 Wild Islands, Magmu Highlands, the Port Jolly Focal Area, critical habitat for coastal plain flora and fauna in the western counties, and many other areas like the Wolfville Watershed Nature Reserve. In the immediate years after the passage of the Wilderness Act, public concern over forest practices continued. As well, there was public concern over DNR's IRM process, which left little room for further protected lands. A coalition of about 40 provincial and local organizations formed the Public Land Coalition and created a campaign for biodiversity hotspots and their protection. The Department of Environment conducted studies for several of these areas, and new areas were protected under the Wilderness Act, including Gully Lake and Egg Mountain. Both the forest industry and the leading NGOs were dissatisfied with the situation at this time. It was increasing public concerns over forest practices and land allocation and the uncertainty it caused. As well, industry was looking at forest certification and maintaining access to markets. So in 2005, CPAWS, the EAC, and the major pulp paper companies created a forum named after the late Colin Stewart, a respected World Wildlife Fund rep in Nova Scotia, to, and I'll quote, their mission was to work together in good faith to develop a mutual agreeable proposal towards completion of the protected area network and that mitigates associated wood supply and cost impacts for the forest industry. In 2007, the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act was passed, setting environmental goals for the province, including adopting the target of at least 12% land protection. The province then integrated the protected area planning for the 12% with the work of the Colin Stewart Forest Forum. Over the next few years, new wilderness areas were established at Blue Mountain, Birch Cove Lakes, Ship Harbor Long Lake, 5 bridges near Halifax, and on Crown lands in the Shenectady Game Sanctuary area. All of these areas were advanced by local organizations and communities, and then assessed by Nova Scotia Environment, followed by public consultation processes. In 2008, the Nova Scotia Crown Share Land Legacy Trust was created by the government with $23 million from the federal provincial offshore oil agreement. The trust provided matching funds for the Nova Scotia Nature Trust and the Nature Conservancy Canada to secure high conservation value lands. In the early 2000s, the federal government's Marine Protected Area program was established. The first MPA associated with Nova Scotia was the designation of the Gully in 2004. And skipping ahead, St. Anne's North in 2017 and Laurentian Channel in 2019. In 2009, the province initiated a process to develop a natural resource strategy for the Department of Natural Resources program areas of responsibilities. The public consultation phases were led by voluntary planning and included a citizen engagement committee and a set of panel of experts. The late Constance Gluby concluded in the report of the Steering Committee on Natural Resources, and I quote, "The status quo is not an option. Unless there is change, Nova Scotia's natural resources will continue to be destroyed. We urge Cabinet to act on the recommendations containing in this report, to seize the opportunity to make a substantial change in how government operates, with an aim to creating a future for natural resources." The resulting strategy, developed and adopted by DNR, did little to address the core issues, and public dissatisfaction with resource management practices grew, with campaigns against clear cutting and other practices. Over the next several years, 3 of the province's largest pulp mills closed. Bowater Resolute in Liverpool, New Page, Port Hawkesbury, eventually sold and then reopened as Port Hawkesbury Paper, and Northern Pulp in Pictou. In response to the mill closures and the economic downturn, the province made major land acquisitions, 600,000 acres from Bowater, large tracts from J.D. Irving and Northern Pulp, and some for the 12% protection target. In 2013, the province released the Parks and Protected Area Plan after a year of public consultation and several years of internal review. The plan increases the amount of land to be protected to 13.5%, including over 220 new wilderness areas, nature reserves, and parks, and adding about 600,000 acres to the system. The plan includes many of the patches identified through the Colin Stewart Forest Forum and conservation lands acquired from forest companies. The average size of the areas identified is smaller than the original 31 areas in 1998, reflecting growth of road networks, fragmentation, and forest harvesting. Some new protected areas need to include harvested areas and roads to create better protected area boundaries and to restore representative ecosystems. Specific areas from the plan were designated under legislation in batches in subsequent years. During this time period, at the request of the towns of Antigonish and Amherst, the province designated under Wilderness Act municipal-owned land within their drinking water supply area to improve protection measures for water. The Auditor General criticized the DNR for slow progress in species at risk in 2016 and in 2021, focusing public attention on this issue. In 2020, Federation of Nova Scotia Naturalists Blondrup and Halifax naturalists took the Nova Scotia government to court over failure to implement the Endangered Species Act. Scotia Supreme Court then basically ordered the government to better protect species at risk. In response to ongoing and heightened concerns over forest practices, the government established an independent review of forest practices led by Professor Leahy at King's College. After much public and stakeholder consultation and use of experts, Professor Leahy issued a report in 2018 that was largely critical of forest management and the use of applied science and the level of transparency. The Leahy report recommended change, including moving towards ecological forestry, adapting federal target at this time 70% protected lands, prioritizing endangered species, regulating for accountability on large private landowners, adopting a non-regulation approach based on incentives for small private landowners. In March 2019, Owl's Head, a component of the Eastern Shore Seaside Park System, for over 40 years was removed from the Parks and Protected Area System planned by Cabinet for a proposed golf course development, creating a major land use conflict and a Nova Scotia Supreme Court case. It drew attention to the weaknesses of provincial park protections. The issue became a broader governance and trust issue for the government. In 2021, the Mi'kmaq Land Conservancy was established to hold, acquire, and protect land, with the Mary Harper Nature Reserve on the Bondrup Lakes being the first held by the trust. The implementation of the 2013 Parks and Protected Area System Plan continued, with batches of properties designated in 2019 and 20. In 2021, in response to the climate change and biodiversity crisis, Environmental Goals and Climate Action Act was passed, and the 20% protected area target became law. In this time period, 2 local land trusts in Lunenburg were active in securing important coastal properties: Kingsburg Coastal Conservancy and Lehigh Coastal Conservation Association. This is significant for Nova Scotia's local forum to focus on local conservation priorities. In June 2022, following several years of land use conflict, the private development proposal was withdrawn and Owl's Head was designated under the Provincial Parks Act. Just a few months later, in the fall of 2022, West Mambo Beach Provincial Park was threatened by a private development proposal, creating a land use conflict and dividing communities. In April 2023, the government stated, in quotes, "The provincial park is protected, and we have no plans to change that." In August 2022, the government released a new old growth policy as recommended in the Leahy report. The policy would protect all local forests on Crown land. In December 2022, the province announced $20 million in new funding for the Crown Share Land Legacy Trust toward the securement of private land in partnership with private land trusts in the province. In January 2023, Glooscap Mountain, designated in 2016, became the first wilderness area under co-management with the Mi'kmaq. In March 2023, a $10 million fund to address HWA spread in the province was announced. Half of the funding received to be used for obtaining and conserving forest lands, and the other half to be used for the HWA Action Treatment Program focused on protected areas. In October 2023, Nova Scotia and Canada signed a $28.5 million Canada-Nova Scotia Nature Agreement to help achieve protection targets. A large portion of the funds is to acquire more land and also to support Indigenous protected and conserved areas. In 2022 and 2023, sets of wilderness areas, nature reserves, and provincial parks were designated, bringing the total area protected to 13.45. Some of these were advanced and field studied and championed by local and provincial NGOs, including River Association, the Sackville River Association, St. Margaret's Bay Stewardship Association, CPAWS, Healthy Forest Coalition, and the AC. In the last 2 years, there have been important conservation-related events at the global level, and has signed on to the Global Biodiversity Framework in December of 2022, and adopted the 30% land and water protection target, and signed on to COP28 with its commitment to fully integrate biodiversity and climate change actions, and place a priority on nature-based solutions in climate mitigation. The province releases its collaborative protected area strategy as an action plan for achieving the target in this past December. Some highlights include 50% target by 2026, that's in 2 years, 20% by 2030 in 6 years, 300,000 hectares to be added, commitment to identify and protect provincially owned lands, the inclusion of qualifying OECs like water supply lands, old growth forests, municipal lands, the expansion of conservation of private lands, the consultation with Mi'kmaq and the inclusion of Mi'kmaq conservation lands, and the promotion and fostering of community and economic benefits. I'd like to share a few thoughts on the implementation of the 20% target with you, but highlighting some of the challenges. The UN projects the world population to be close to 10 billion by 2050. Nova Scotia population is being estimated to double. We can think about this in the context of the demand on land and resources. Climate change and biodiversity crisis in Nova Scotia is becoming real to the public. More frequent and severe winds, precipitation, temperatures, drought periods, and increase in habitat loss and species at risk. There are multiple demands on public lands. Forest products, conservation, minerals, housing, energy, infrastructure, recreation. And for private land conservation, land values and land use competition are increasing. I would also like to summarize the existing ecological condition of the province as a setting for the identification of new areas. The province's landscapes are increasingly highly fragmented, and roadless natural areas outside of protected areas are in smaller patches. Forests in early development stage and clear cuts dominate most landscapes. Mature climax forests are mostly dispersed in smaller patches. Species at risk continue to be at risk, and habitat loss continues. The province is 65% private land, with only a small percent protected in private ownership. High production forest areas of crown land have recently been identified, and invasive species like HWA and chain pickerel are spreading. In the context of these challenges, and understanding that by 2030, with the 20% target achieved, the protected area system will sit within a provincial landscape that consists of 80% working and developed lands, stressing the importance of protected area selection in order to maximize the ecological role of the protected area system. Areas selected should be the foundation or core to the broader goal of the creation of healthy landscapes that adapt to and help mitigate climate change impacts and reduce biodiversity loss. Recognizing that protected areas cannot achieve healthy landscapes by themselves, but they play a critical role. Areas selected should help build ecological resilience in landscapes. Areas selected should help maintain the ecological parts and the processes. Areas selected together with the network of large and small protected area patches with some connectivity through natural corridors. And areas selected should contribute to healthy communities. In this context, the very basic challenge is to maximize the benefits by selecting the very best high conservation lands still available. Recognizing that this is time sensitive, some of the best areas to meet legal targets and maximize benefits may be lost. There's an urgent need for Nova Scotia Environment to identify key protectors in Crown land. There is a need to support and expand the securement of high conservation value private lands by both private land trusts and the government. As noted previously, new government funding is in place to acquire land and to partner with private land trusts. There is a need for land use planning and conflict resolution that provides a pathway to achieve the 20% target in the context of all the other demands on Crown. And there is a need for a more defined collaborative process to encourage and support partnerships, including community groups, NGOs, and municipalities that wish to help in the 20% implementation process. In essence, the province needs all hands on deck to help meet the legislated 20% target. Thank you very much. That on there.
Any questions? Yes.
Is there an online map for first or original forests? And the second part of that question, is there also some format where some of these are accessible by the public?
Yes.
Is there an online map?
Me?
Me? Sorry, we usually repeat the question so people on Zoom can
Yes.
hear.
Yes, the question is there an online map for old growth forests in Nova Scotia? And is there information on accessing old growth forests in Nova Scotia? And yes, there is a map for old growth forests in Nova Scotia. And when you go to the provincial landscape viewer, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you just Google provincial landscape viewer, and it's got a key on the left hand side, and you can find old growth forests, and it's kept up fairly regularly, and they'll show you the location of them. Now, in terms of access, there isn't like a program to access old growth forests, but if most of the accessible ones are in, of course, in national parks and provincial parks and in wilderness areas. So it's a bit of you have to study the map, but many of them are very close to roads. And if you can only walk so far, or you're afraid of getting lost or whatever, some of them are quite accessible. Those patches you'll see on the maps.
Just to comment on that, there is one section in those chain lakes, which is right on the road, and come June, we'll put it up exactly where you can go there. It's right on the road. There's a trail right into it. Now, the trees are not as impressive as other places in the backcountry. I'm not sure what the criteria are for clarifying it. It's a very nice place.
Yeah.
Larry?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to ask if you would define how you decide an old growth forest.
What DNR has got a standard protocol for mapping old growth forests and identifying, and you can find that online as well on their website, DNR's website, and it's basically measuring certain criteria, like you can imagine the age of trees, the density of old trees, the amount of old trees, the amount of dead woody debris on the ground, etc. There's a whole set of criteria. And they developed a scoring system that if they reach a certain level of score, then it's considered to be an old growth forest. And as well, a lot of people kind of intuitively know if they're in an old growth forest as well, without having to have the science. And the main reason is because old growth forests occur in such small areas and in such a small percent of the total forest. You know when you're in an old forest. Now that's because it contrasts so much with surrounding forests, and for instance, the Nova Scotia Nature, I volunteer for the Nova Scotia Crown Land Trust that provides money to the Nature Trust, Nature Conservancy, and I'm on the science committee for that group. And so they protect all kinds of lands and they focus on old forests, but they don't necessarily rely on the scoring mechanism. Again, because they're working in the in a mosaic of private land that is mostly younger forests, and they know if it's, like it's, if the structure's there, you know, if the large trees are there, and they're not everywhere else, that it's pretty safe to be, and so they'll buy the land based on that, you know, and, but, DNR likes to do it officially, and they've identified a lot of nice areas across the province. A lot of them eventually become part of the protected area system as well, where old growth forests are in patches. That's a good area to add to the, 20% target. Yeah. Yes.
Based on the current processes, do you think that 20% is achievable by 2026?
The government is taking it serious, and I can say that from my own experience, starting in the late 70s with the Department of Lands and Forests and so on. There's a lot of money being allocated to buy private land, and if you look at our map here, this is existing system, protected area system. Okay, the big green areas are wilderness areas, the yellow areas are national parks, the purple areas are provincial parks, the kind of orangey area are nature reserves, and you can also see the private land, conservation lands in it. And you can see the gaps. See where the gaps are? Gaps are where the private land is concentrated and the real good soils are that were farmed. So the Annapolis Valley, the North Mountain, the south slope of the North Mountain, Lunenburg County with all its drumlin fields, the Northumberland Plain around the Bredor Lakes, the Shubenacadie Hills in the middle. Those are the big gaps, and that's really where a good protected area system should represent all our ecosystem types, all our soil types, all our geology types, all the conditions for life that exist in the province. So it's very important to have this funds that the governments have allocated. I've never seen the levels of funding in all my years as what's happening right now, and I guess, and even like the formation of two new trusts down in Lunenburg County, where local trusts can also, some people feel like donating to a local trust because it's local. And others feel like donating to a national trust because it's national, and it all depends on your perspective. But Maine started off with a couple of large trusts, and now they have 50, 60, 70 local trusts as well as the large trusts. And it's really more boots on the ground, all hands on deck. And, local trusts tend to have lawyers and real estate people, retired and not retired, as well as conservationists. So they're very important, but that's really a focus on trying to fill those gaps. And it's very important ecologically to do that. But getting to your question of is it possible, the demands on Crown land are intense. Like, just you see the housing and energy developments and the forest allocations are there. They're there in place. So Port Hawkesbury paper has most of its work is on the Crown lands in the 6 eastern counties. Now they're certified under the Forest Stewardship Council, and they have a lot of they recognize all those areas in Cape Breton and Guysborough County as part of their system, but also they have high conservation value lands that they pick out themselves and do. So, but there are challenges. It's not going to be easy, and when you look at the numbers, there really has to be there has to be a shift to understanding that because we have so little Crown land, that a lot of it, greater percent of it, has to be used for conservation, particularly in the context of climate change crisis and biodiversity crisis. But solutions have to be found in terms of a broader thinking, and that's what I was raising the issue of planning, land use planning, because right now you're seeing You're seeing energy projects being approved on Crown, you're seeing, you know, forestry, high production forestry lands identified for Crown land. And you have the 20%, and it's not being integrated. Because the problems that exist by land competition require integrated thinking to find solutions. Some of those solutions are on private land, like better support for ecological forestry on private land. Recognizing that some of the Crown land will have to go to protected areas and will not be available for forest harvesting. So the solutions there, maybe wind farms and stuff should be more incentivized to be more on large private landowners that maybe have already clear cut land too, you know. So all I'm throwing out ideas here, but you can see the solutions come from integrating land uses. You think about that, and right now it just seems we're going like this, you know, one-offs, and but to get there, to answer your question, to get there, that's what's going to be required, is to solve those problems that way. Yeah.
Gary, you have a question?
Yeah, do you have any idea of the ratio between old growth hardwood and old growth softwood forests?
No, I don't. I don't know off the top of my head.
I've only come across one hardwood forest so far.
Oh, yes, yeah. There's a beautiful one that I was involved with MTRI identifying, and Louise and I did field work. And it's only a kilometer off the road. It's called Little Bear Lake. And it's right beside Midway Lakes Wilderness Area. I don't want to leave the microphone here, but can I walk over there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I should take this.
But right here is Midway Lakes Wilderness Area, and this is full of hardwood drumlins. And there's some old forest, but right next to it is Little Bear Lake. And on the map I was just referring to, the provincial landscape viewer, you can see the old growth forest stand highlighted, and it's a drumlin hill. And if you walk through it, particularly along the sides of it, it's just acres and acres of yellow birch trees, sugar maples that are huge. Now the top of the drumlin was affected by hurricanes and storms back in the 40s and 50s, and so the sides of the drumlin were protected more. So, but the top of the drumlin, it's got like all those big trees that came down in the hurricane are all in huge hummocks that you walk over. So all that carbon is in the ground. It's all great habitat in the soil. It's just, you know, but that is just one of the most beautiful hardwood stands in the province. But Little Bear Lake, and look for that.
I was in one off Lambs Lake.
Oh, yes.
Which is just the tag.
Yes, Lambs Lake. Yes, good for you. That is nice.
Just add to that question about if they're separate, the hardwood and the deciduous. If it was a genuine Acadian forest, would it not be integrated?
There's both. In the Acadian forest, there's the mixed classic Acadian forest with all kinds of species there, but there's also conditions on the ground that create a pure softwood forest in the Canadian forest and pure hardwood forest as well.
So you would consider the tent that we're eating
Canadian forest, primary, yeah,
coniferous.
yes, good point, yeah. Hello.
How many proposals have been put into the government for them to consider over the next 7 years?
But by NGOs and citizen groups? No, I don't. That would have to be something you'd ask the
When we were there, they said that 6, was it?
6, yeah.
So they decide on those things.
Well, I mean, that's true, but I think yeah, no, I'm more positive than that, in terms of, like, they have a target of 15% in 2 years. Okay, so they have to be starting to identified Crown land sites. And yeah, and so, but the way forward is to really, I think it's really to connect in a collaborative way with citizens and citizen groups to help out. Because realistically, the skills that you people have in conservation and people around the province that are in naturalist groups and so on. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It is, it's true from what I understand that you noted that there's $30 million or there's a large amount of money from the federal government. And that money is theoretically clawed back if they don't get the 50% by 2026.
So that's-
Yes, that's a good point, yeah.
Maybe one final question?
Yeah.
I think I saw a hand up here, maybe not. John?
Basically, my question, I really admire how you brought the pros and cons. What do you think the odds are? That they will, I mean, you've seen the Coastal Protection Act clawed back,
Yes.
you know, and things like that. Suddenly when business needs their money, the government tends to lean towards that way. Do you think we're going to hit do you think we have a good odds of hitting the 20% by 2030?
I'm optimistic. I am, partly because of the amount of money that's going into it now. And, but at the same time, it's the competition for Crown land is very real. But, and so that has to be solved, and interest on all sides, like scarcity of resources, tragedy of the common, what's everybody, it's gonna get more intense than the first system of protected areas like the Tobiatic and that I was deeply involved with in the mid-90s. The public really supported that, and the resource industries didn't like it, opposed it, but the intensity of competition from all kinds of users isn't quite the same as it is now. So very careful work and planning has to be done, and I really think the focus on the very best conservation lands is really important. Areas that got mature forests are very important. We need to make sure the protected area system works, for the functions it's supposed to work for, Yes, so.
No, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I've lived on the Ross Street Road for over 20 years. I've owned property there for 40. In the last 5 years, it's dirt road, truck after double truck, I don't know what you call those trucks, flatbed trucks.
Yes.
With logs go up my mountain. I don't know where those logs are. I have a ravine on both sides of a deep ravine that is inaccessible. But it would be privately owned because I only own 50 acres and it goes right down to the bottom of the ravine.
Yes.
On my side, and the same on the other side. Could there be any initiative to take an area like that hasn't, and I mean, I'm no expert, so I don't know if there are mature trees in there. I've walked through it, but I'm not a judge to know.
Yeah.
And it has been logged and worked on, but it's so inaccessible, and the bottom of it is just a delta.
Excuse me.
More or less below sea level. And I don't know whether that's any worth protecting, but it will gradually become more and more cut up if it can't be preserved as one geographical area.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's you just described the kind of problem all over Nova Scotia. Right, it really is true, and that's why private land conservation groups are so motivated. That's why 40,000 hectares they've protected. I would never have thought that when they first started, as organizations in the early 90s, that they would ever reach that state, so many islands, so many, bird habitats. I mean, it's just amazing the work they've done and really needs to be more of that across the province on private land conservation. Yeah.
Thanks. So please, everybody go home, get your computers out, go to the place I showed you and say, don't cut these things. Because they are old growth. And sign the petition.
Sign the
please.
petition.
Anyway, please help me in thanking John for helping us. We give $100.
Oh,
There
no,
we
no,
go.
no, no, no.
No? No. Oh, okay.
No.
No,
Keep
okay.
it for your,
We'll keep it.
all good work you've done.
Yes, okay.